You know, ever since people started forming societies, we've been wrestling with this huge, fundamental problem. How do you create order out of what feels like total chaos? Every civilization, from the ancient empires right up to today, has tried to come up with a set of rules for how we should all get along, all in the hope of finding some kind of lasting peace and stability.
And as Henry Kissinger points out here, that search, well, it's more urgent today than it's ever been. We live in a world that's so interconnected with all these new and complicated threats popping up. So trying to find a framework that we can all agree on, that's not just some academic debate, it's something we desperately need.
So this is really the big question we're tackling in this explainer. Because we want to understand the challenges we're facing right now, we've got to look back at the past. We're going to dive into 4 huge and often clashing historical answers to this exact question.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with just the basic quest for order itself, and then we're going to explore 4 totally different historical visions. Europe's very pragmatic balance of power idea, China's hierarchical view of the world, Islam's universal mission, and America's deep-seated belief in finding peace through democracy. And then we'll wrap it all up and see how these old ideas are still shaping our world today. Okay, let's jump in. Our first stop is Europe, where this absolutely brutal continent-wide conflict, the 30 Years' War, forced everybody to think in a completely new way. I mean, after decades of just horrific bloodshed over whose version of religious truth was right, Europeans kind of threw up their hands and landed on a system that valued stability over any one single ideology.
And this is what they came up with, the Westphalian system, named after the treaty that ended the war in 1648. Honestly, it was a very practical solution. It was an admission that, hey, the world is filled with different states, and they all have their own interests and beliefs. So the goal wasn't to make everyone the same. The goal was to create a framework so they could all exist together without constantly being at each other's throats.
And these principles, for the time, they were absolutely revolutionary. The core idea is that every state is its own boss within its borders, and nobody else gets to interfere. And if one state gets too big for its britches and tries to dominate everyone else, the other states will naturally team up to push back and restore the balance. You can literally see the DNA of modern international law right here. Order doesn't come from one big ruler, it comes from this constantly shifting equilibrium.
And this quote, it just perfectly nails the whole mindset. The 19th century British statesman Lord Palmerston basically laid out the operating system. Alliances are flexible, friendships between nations can change. Everything is based on one simple question: what serves our national interest and keeps the whole system in balance?
Now, I want you to completely flip your thinking, because we're heading east to a totally different vision of how the world should work. For thousands of years, China didn't see itself as just another country. Not at all. It saw itself as the center of civilization, the one true empire governing, as they said, all under heaven.
So at the very heart of this system, you have the Chinese emperor. He was seen as the son of heaven, the literal link between the gods and the mortal world. Other countries weren't equals, they were outsiders, and their entire relationship with China was basically defined by how close or far away they were from this cultural and political sun.
And you can see how this is just a world away from the European model, right? Here, order wasn't maintained by a bunch of states balancing each other out. It was maintained by everybody else just acknowledging China's supreme cultural and political position. So when foreign diplomats came to China, it wasn't a meeting of equals. It was a tribute mission. They were expected to perform rituals like the kowtow to show respect for the emperor. And in return, China would grant them the privilege of trade and cultural exchange.
You've got to hear this quote. It's from a letter the emperor sent to King George III of Britain back in 1793, and it tells you everything. The British wanted to set up embassies and have more trade, like equals. The emperor basically wrote back saying, "Thanks, bud, no thanks. We have everything we could possibly need. We don't need your stuff." The tone isn't really aggressive. It's just this calm, paternalistic assumption of total self-sufficiency and authority over the rest of the world.
So let's just pause for a second and put these two side by side, because they couldn't be more different. On one side, you have Europe's system of many equals, where order comes from a mechanical balancing act. And on the other, you have China's system of one unique center, where order comes from the sheer gravitational pull of its superior civilization.
All right, for our third major concept of world order, we're shifting gears again. This one isn't based on a balance of states or on a cultural hierarchy. It's built on a universal divine mission. This is the vision that came out of classical Islam.
So this classical worldview saw all of human history as a process, a journey toward unifying everyone under one divinely ordained system. It traditionally saw the world as being split into 2 main spheres: a realm of peace, governed by the faith, and then everything else, which would eventually be brought into that peaceful realm.
So here's how that traditional worldview was structured. You had the House of Islam, which was considered the realm of peace, all governed by one leader, the Caliph. And then the rest of the world was the realm of war, which was destined, eventually, to be brought into the House of Islam. So the ultimate goal was universal peace and harmony, achieved through the expansion of the faith, a concept often tied to the very complex term jihad, which in this context means struggle.
And wow, this quote from the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror just says it all, doesn't it? He was talking to the bickering Italian city-states back in the 15th century, and his message was clear. Unlike the Westphalian idea of accepting lots of different states and beliefs, this vision of order was singular and universal. There was one truth, one legitimate government, and the mission was to extend it to everybody.
And for our fourth and final vision, we're crossing the Atlantic to the New World for an idea that was completely revolutionary in its own way. This is the American concept, the idea that true world order doesn't come from balancing power or a cultural hierarchy or even a single faith. It comes from the universal spread of freedom.
The core belief here is that the principles America was founded on, liberty, democracy, equality, they're not just American values, they're universal human values. And so the thinking goes, if you could just spread those principles around the world, you'd end up with a world full of democracies. And a world of democracies, well, that would be a world at peace.
What's so interesting here is that this worldview has always had two sides to it. On one hand, there's the idea that America should just be an inspiring example for others to follow if they choose. But on the other hand, there's this more active, almost missionary impulse to go out and actively spread democratic values around the globe because it's seen as both a moral duty and a path to global peace.
And this idea goes way, way back. Check out this quote from John Winthrop. He was one of the first Puritan settlers, and he said this to his fellow colonists before their ship had even landed in America. So from the very beginning, there was this powerful sense that the American experiment wasn't just for them. It was a model being built for the whole world to watch, and they hoped eventually copy.
All right, so we've just walked through four incredibly powerful and distinct ideas about how the world should be organized. We've got Europe's balance of rivals, China's celestial hierarchy, Islam's universal faith, and America's democratic mission. So let's pull them all together now for one last side-by-side comparison.
This table really just lays it all out. Plain and simple. It gets to the core DNA of each model. It makes you ask these fundamental questions. How do you achieve peace? Is it through balance, through deference, through faith, or through shared values? And how do you see other countries? Are they equals? Are they subordinates? Are they unbelievers? Or are they potential partners? Each of these worldviews offers a completely different set of answers, and those answers have shaped centuries of history.
And that leaves us right here with the central challenge of our time. These four visions, they're not just dusty old history. Their legacies, their assumptions are very much alive today, and they are shaping how major global powers act right now. So the ultimate question for us, for our generation, is this. Is it even possible to build a global system that everyone sees as fair and legitimate when we all come from such different histories and have such different ideas of what order even means?